Yep.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Call to order the Tuesday, March 10th, 2020 Cushman County Board of Supervisors Budget Session. And so, we will begin. Presentation, discussion of the county's 2021 to 2045 capital improvement plan. And so, Ms. Horlacher, would you like to begin us off on this process today?
Thank you, Ms. Moskowitz. So we're operating from 20 years ago with our presentation on the flash drive today because the internet's down. So it's given us all a little reminder of
Internet got a virus? It's not a fly.
how much things have changed. What I'm going to do today is focus, of course, on the first year. So in general, what we try to do is have a 25-year plan, and so all the work is done, and then we pass 1 year and move everything forward and just keep things rolling. But it doesn't always work out perfectly like that, so we've also tried to highlight what some of the differences are this year from previous CIPs. So as you all know, the year one of the CIP is adopted by the board. The 5-year plan is balanced, so I'll show you revenues to pay for all that, and then the 25-year plan is approved as a whole, but not adopted at this point. And the planning considerations you're all familiar with. Life cycles are tried to plan in consumer price index increase, population growth, and evaluating alternatives to maintain existing structures versus new construction. We've been very lucky here and able to cash fund certain projects, but this CIP does utilize $54.2 million in debt to fund a new Goochland Elementary School, road improvements to Bulldog Way, and a new courthouse. And that is also keeping within our debt capacity while maintaining the current tax rate, and we'll show you more about that at the end. And it also will require a future referendum. So the FY21 CIP is $5.8 million. Most of that for education and fire rescue, and then the rest of the other departments that are represented as well. And then of course the 25-year is a $111 million plan. Again, education, this time transportation comes in second. And I'll talk about this more, but transportation is the majority of the plan is funded by federal and state funds. So even though it represents $35 million of the whole pie, the source of the funds from that is, for the most part, state and federal money. So we'll start with facilities management. So we're going down the sheet, the big sheet, if you have a copy of that. Also, if you want to look in your book, that would start on page 252. And this is the, okay, so this is the 5-year plan, but I'm going to speak mostly to the first year, which I thought was up here, but anyway, the so FY21, we have $185,000, which goes to facilities and grounds maintenance. That's kind of what we call our site improvement line. We tend to do, larger than minor projects, but not really big projects out of that. Repair a sidewalk comes to mind. We've done some of the improvements at Central High School with those funds. We've done some of the improvements for the business center with those funds. Sometimes we can do minor roof repairs or even some small roof replacements with those funds, and those are constant every year. County vehicle replacement, and that's highlighted because it was $80,000, it's now $100,000, and the way we handle vehicle replacements, with the exception of the Sheriff's Department, and you'll see a line for that in a minute, but These are replacement vehicles, so vehicles that have now aged to the point where we're spending more on maintenance and it makes sense to replace them. So for facilities and for the building inspections crew and all those departments, if a department gets a new person, new body, and they need a new vehicle, that is in their operating budget. But once we purchased it and they've gone through the cycle, then it gets replaced from these funds. And so we're increasing that to 100,000. We are also asking for funds for a replacement tractor backhoe. That was 75,000 last year, and after evaluating the price of those things, that is now 95,000 this year. And then the Goochland Sports Complex right next door, that was in the plan before, but it has been moved up. It has been split in two, 125,000 this year and 350,000 next year. And I know there's some floor replacements that need down there, so there's some bathroom redoings that need there. And but if you have any further questions on any of that, Derek is here to discuss that.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Peterson. Oh, I'm sorry.
If I could for just a minute. On the vehicle replacement, this is the county vehicles. This isn't the sheriff deputy vehicles.
It's not sheriff
fire
deputy and
rescue.
it's not utility vehicles.
Okay.
Or fire rescue.
Or fire rescue. So,
Or fire rescue, right, their little SUVs and everything they have in their budget.
So I'll make one global comment that pertains to all of those, and I won't make it each time it comes up. I just want to make sure a couple of things. One, that we're, as it's shown here, a very smooth replacement cycle, so it's not lumpy and we don't have a lot of vehicles in any given year. So that we take the average useful life and divide by the number of vehicles and get a steady replacement cycle. But then also, especially for the Sheriff's Department and Fire Rescue, that as the county grows and we add boots on the ground or steering wheels, that we make sure that we increase the steady state with the increase in the fleet. Now, I know there'll be some things like the ladder truck, that's a one-time purchase and that's lumpy and it's expensive, but for the normal number of vehicles, whether it's pumper vehicles, just so we have a steady state that includes the growth, so we don't have lumpiness. Now, recognizing that in a recession, one of the things you may have to do is run the miles up a little bit more and defer some purchases if we have to tighten our belt a little bit. But for the normal everyday, ongoing operating budget and CIP budget, I just want to make sure that we have as smooth as we can budget for the recurring needs. So I'll make that comment once globally. The other thing is, second bullet point up, it says 100,000 in 22 and 365 in 24. I see 350 in 22 and nothing in 24. Was that moved or?
Yes, it was in 22 and 24, and now it's been moved to 21 and 22.
And adjusted to the numbers you see there.
Okay, so it was in 22 and 4. It's now been compressed and increased and modified to 21 and 22.
Because I think
Okay.
the repairs were more eminent than we had hoped. That's
Just
Okay.
to
Sure, that's all I had, Madam Chair.
Just a couple other points of clarification. One, as we do with all the presentations, we will post these and send this after. Our net printers are also on the network, so we couldn't make copies of this to hand you right now. So we learned a little bit of a lesson today. The other thing is, we wanted to make sure that we were calling attention to, most of these projects were already in last year's adopted CIP. So if something has changed, we're calling attention to it. We'll also call attention to it if it's a new project that wasn't anticipated in prior year CIPs. And so when you see yellow, that does not necessarily mean it's a new project. It just means there is a change of some nature in that particular project. And so we'll call all of those out as we go through the slides.
So this is just showing you more of facilities, but with more emphasis on the out years. Those were just the projects that start in FY21, and So we were showing the whole cycle of those. You can see that other replacements come in 22, 23, and 24, and those are HVACs that we predict may need replacing, roofs that we may need repairing, and so we'll stick to mostly the 21, but just so you get a picture for 22 and 20 through 25.
I don't see anybody. Mr. Peterson, sorry.
Library, the 250. I think the last time we spent some money in the library was to bump out the back and add some computers and do all that. A lot of that was proffer money. It was use it or lose it. And I know they changed the proffer law a couple of times. Is this 250 net of any residual proffer monies that we have?
That is the proffer money that we currently have and that we need to spend.
We need to spend by then. So that's already funds that we've already collected. that
Correct.
Need to be spent or else they go away.
Correct.
We do not have a defined project at this time. We will be working with the library to figure out how we can maximize that. There have been some talks about small expansions onto the existing facility. It is not a separate, distinct new facility. This is improvements for capacity expansion at the existing facility.
And that's what the proffer money has to be for.
It has to be spent on
For
that.
that.
Capacity expansion.
Not just sprucing the
Salaries.
place up or.
Salaries. Yeah.
Correct.
I guess it's.
I'm sorry if you mentioned this and I missed it. What was the reason we moved the monies up for the youth and sports complex?
Okay. Eric, to join us?
So when we try to lay out our 5-year CIP, there are priorities and there are certain things that we feel that we can extend the life of to that point. That's not the case. It didn't work out that way. We had to reprioritize and shift it forward so that we can address the problem before it got worse.
So it's roof and
replacements,
floors.
primarily roof replacements and restroom renovations, lighting improvements, security improvements.
Okay, and this is the rate, the building
It's the,
rate.
yes, sir, it's the gym right behind the administration building.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lesko, quick follow-up on that. You have a note in here, it says it is the goal of the county to maintain its infrastructure to the manufacturer's recommended life cycles. This includes 15 years for carpet, 15 years HVAC, and 20 years for roof. So is that's the base,
That's our baseline, yes, sir.
So.
That's countywide.
So, okay, good, that was my question, countywide, and then, so something, we missed the mark or something happened on the roof.
So the flat roof to the rear of the building, we replaced the roof on the flat roof on the front portion of the building. It's broken up into 3 pieces. So you've got the gym roof, you've got the front portion of the building. Those 2 levels were replaced. The flat roof at the back was right at its life cycle, and we decided to go ahead and bump it up, to reprioritize it, to go ahead and get it replaced and get it up to warranty.
So what I'm asking, this is a countywide, 15 years carpet, 15 years HVAC, 20 years for you. Are we testing how we're doing? I mean, has this been the 15, 15, 20, that's been the
Yes,
number
sir,
for a while?
that's what we've adopted from an industry standard practice.
What I'm getting at is, is
Monitor all our assets.
this working?
Is it realistic?
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we're learning as we go. We just started this 2 years ago. And so we didn't plan projects that way, to be honest with you. I think it would probably be fair, the plan now calls it out that we're intentional about it. I assume from a planning perspective, you would look at it along those lines. This is a little more intentional of minimum lifespans kinds of things. We did not look beyond 5 years in our old CIP planning. From a general maintenance management, maybe, but not in our CIPs. And Dr. Reed, I think it's probably accurate for the schools to some extent. I think the facility managers would have planned sort of independently, but the CIPs didn't account for it.
And it's really one of the beauties of the 25-year. We get to take a look at it all the way out and plan 15, 20, 25 years.
But I think your fundamental question is something
Is it
at the heart of why we're doing all of this. And so we want to make sure that the routine maintenance we're doing is allowing us to at least achieve the manufacturer's suggested warranties. And when we can extend lives, we're doing so when practical.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, judicial administration, we really only have one project there. And this project's gotten moved around a lot. So the latest is what you currently see now is that $1 million of planning, pre-planning type money to be spent in FY23 and 16.3 in FY24. We have previously put $500,000 into this project, and that has been almost all spent when we purchased the piece of land that contains the doctor's office from Goochland Cares. So it ended up last year way out in 28, and then we've now moved it forward at the request of the current judge, and we can talk about that a little more. And then we have also reduced it. It was 25 million, and we've also reduced it just to make the whole plan balance. And it does use some of that debt that we talked about earlier, where we would issue 54.4 million, and this would require 15.4 million, and of that debt to fund this. And I'll let Mr. Badesky discuss the courthouse further.
One thing I do want to point out is, this is out in year 4 of the plan. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and year 4. And we're using construction estimates that are probably at the peak right now, even at the 17.5 mark. We may find that we're in a position like several years from now that we either had better cash reserves that we could have contributed and we can tackle a bigger project. I think we all recognize there's economies to scale to build a building once right than there is to piecemeal it. This plan, unfortunately, has it being built in phases because we couldn't do the full 25 million. And that's our reality right now. I'm hoping as we get down the road a few more years, maybe we're in a better position. All that being said, there are competing interests for funds. We have more needs for this project. The school has projects that we deferred to bring this back in. But right now, to balance, this would solve most of the core functions of the courthouse and address the existing security-related issues. However, it would not allow us to put every office under one roof, which is the preferred design. And I say that not knowing exactly who would be in and who would be out right now. We just know that on a cost per square footage basis, we could not build out the original projection that would have done that. And so as we get into design, we'll have to make some tough choices of who needs to either reside in their current offices, who will be in the phase 1 of this, and then roughly $8-9 million of expansion will be needed at some other time if this goes forward. Unfortunately, we were not, with the parameters of maintaining the current tax rate, even with growth, we were not able to bring more of that project into this at this time. Obviously, there's other ways to skin that cat. You can do it the way I said, by either, if we're lucky enough, we can contribute additional cash. The alternative is you start pulling other projects and priorities out to beef this up. And that is a possibility. And I will say we tried to poke holes in the recommendations as well. So if you don't make improvements to the sports complex, can you add more to the courthouse? Sure, but there are trade-offs. And these again they're coming from the staff recommendation, but certainly the board has prerogative to consider alternatives to that as well.
And Ms. Agnew's here if anybody has any questions, maybe from the actual judicial perspective.
Question, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Badesky, with the phase approach, so this is being brought forward from previous years based on concerns, and having been there and seeing what little, for lack of a better word, projection there is, and that situation, there's definitely something needed. If we do phase 1, how much of that need is addressed to where, how much of that need is addressed so that in the future we're not saying, okay, we need to bring phase 2 in now sooner, so it doesn't, like, how much time does that get us?
I'll do my best to answer that question, because we haven't really
That's a
gone
tough
into
question.
design right now. There is, when you do not have all functions under one roof with courts, and I'll also defer to some of the experts, you are always gonna have some level of security challenge, because users of that courts facility are gonna have to come in through some either single point of entry with the customers of that court, where typically they may have their own corridors inside of a building, different parking access and those kinds of things. So I think what we believe we can probably accomplish is at least getting the courts, the bailiff functions, potentially not all the clerks in this scenario, but main core operations with core security would be here. Sallyport, potential holding cells would all be in this phase. I can't promise right now that all the clerk's offices would make it into this phase. And I don't want to say, because I like Delmore, that I'm going to make sure that her office ends up in first and General District doesn't. We don't know until we get into more the design and planning side of that. But at some point, any time one of the clerk's offices that supports a judicial function is not under that one roof, there will be some level of security challenge that's unmet. And so I know I'm not giving you exact answers to your question, but I'm doing my best.
I guess the question I have in my mind, and it's probably one of the difficult to answer until we have to actually get closer, which is, what is the risk of us having to bring something else in because all of a sudden it's more of an urgent need?
I think it's a fair question and concern, and that's why, if I had my druthers, we'd be doing this all in one shot. I will say that I am familiar with other communities that have done this, and anytime whether it's a school or a courthouse, you don't build it out the way you think you should, you have regrets, but we're also financially constrained. And so how you do it, we will basically work with the users and try to figure out where addressing the highest level of risk first, to minimize that, but I don't think it will fully go away if we don't build the full facility. Even if you got a campus style court like we do today, you have people leaving offices, coming out into open areas that have the potential for conflicts with customers, and that would not solely go away if that's all we could build.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
So, Mr. Besky, is it fair to say that through this process, through the acquisition of property, through the architectural design, through the infrastructure building, that we're taking into account the full build out, so that we don't have to either redo things or re-spend? So it'll be, and then we'll build it as soon as we can with heavy consultation with the users, because they're the ones that are going to tell us, if we have this much money available, what would you do with it? What's your top priorities? How would you, but keeping in mind the full build out, design and architecture and infrastructure and all of that. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. And thank you for that clarification, because we would, in order to be prepared to do those expansions, you're going to want to do the design all at once, so you can figure out where they're going to attach. Or the other thing that we'll look at is can we build shell space and potentially come back in and renovate shell space later. You can build shells sometimes cheaper all at once. And so I think we'll have to evaluate that, but the design would be done all on the front end, because not only for when money becomes available, we're going to have to address all the runoff issues, the parking issues, and all those kinds of things in that design. And you want to do that once so you're not coming back in and disrupting. The other reality, and I will say, we even learned, and this wasn't my first courts building, when you're building next to an active courts, it is a major challenge. The judges and folks in the courts prefer to be able to work in an environment that's conducive to hearing the cases, and active construction doesn't allow for that. So I think we're going to have to be sensitive when we do that design and figure out what phases could come. If we did an addition later, what's the easiest and most optimal way to do an addition or do a future build out where you can actually operate in courts? I did one with a shelf space in New Kent, the judge made us work second, third shift and weekends.
That's golden
And
time.
the cost of the project goes up proportionately because you work. And so that's a real factor that we have to consider. That's why I'm hopeful that whether it's through cash or something, we're able to bump that up and do a little bit more by the time we bid this, but there's a lot of unknowns 4 years out.
There's another factor, and we don't know yet what the governor's gonna sign, but bills have passed the General Assembly, Project Labor Act, agreements, and prevailing wage, which is Davis-Bacon. And some are estimating could be as much as a 30% increase on all of our construction, but it applies to all local governments. So we're gonna see how this folds out, but that could have a huge impact here,
Across the board.
across the board.
Quick question, but after that, there probably the numbers don't even matter. But I'll take it. A 60% increase in capacity that's noted, that's the space increase, which looks like what the project's calling for, a 60% increase in space. Does that come from our 2017 county space plan?
I believe so. There, you can answer that a little bit better. The space plan has met with all of the different judicial functions, I guess it's been almost 3 years ago now, doing those longer term projections.
So that's where that number
Yes, sir,
comes from?
that's correct.
Okay. Where does the 25 million come from?
The 25 million number were cost estimates provided by our space study consultants on price per square foot footprint. So when they met with all the departments and projected out their square footage needs, all of the cost estimates, they gave us recommendations, and then we came up with our own figures as well.
So that projection was what they came up in 2017?
Yes, sir.
For the square foot unit with a 2% annual factor?
Accelerator, yes, sir.
So that might not
And
be
you know,
realistic,
it's close.
given what's the pricing of construction. Yeah, okay, thank you.
We can only do what we have in front of us at the moment. So that's what we're doing.
Okay.
Fire rescue.
Fire and rescue. Fire rescue budget for FY21 is about 1.9 million. They have an emergency response replacement plan that they have been working on, and a lot of these are things we've been working on from year to year to year. The hydraulic tools replacement, I think this is the fourth year, and then there's one more year of that. So that was a total of 500,000 originally, and we've been spending a year at a time. An ambulance replacement in FY21, and it's planned for to be paid for with county cash, county funds, but the fire department would always apply for state grants, and they've been fairly successful. And then the patient stretcher replacements, that was added in FY21 at 36,000, and that's the automatic stretchers. And then of course the big item in this is a ladder truck replacement. We had a ladder truck in there in FY23. We were able to move some things around back and forth, and move that up to FY21. It was at 1.2 million, and that we moved it up to 1.4, which is just barely going to cover the ladder truck. So, and we have two representatives from the fire department here, if you have any questions on their CIP.
We did, Blake can probably speak to it, we did look at demos as well as new chassis and all those kinds of things, and the real number is 1.4, we tried to get it down.
That's correct, yeah, because every increase is over 6% every year, so we're trying to get it on the previous pricing, and we're looking at different lanes that the trucks can go down as far as time frame and everything else, depending on how custom they are. But we're obviously trying to there's a need in the East End, we're trying to get that through what we need as quickly as possible.
Where
guys got capacity in there?
Yes, sir.
And the height.
They got the door height, which is an important piece of it as well.
That will involve one of the rescues that is currently at Station 1 will be relocated and will be moved out of the The ambulance grant is due next week. We're gonna ask for a 50-50 grant, and that should free up some of those. Patient stretchers also included in the same grant package, based on the price point stuff. We're gonna apply for 50-50, so that will free up some of that funding, I believe, if we're successful with that grant. The goal would probably be moving forward, as we get a new ambulance, we'll be procuring a stretcher with it, because those do have about a 10-year lifespan that are no longer supported. So as we look through what we have in the fleet, we want to make sure that we do have a plan to replace those items as appropriate, follow manufacturing recommendations.
We did have a ladder truck at Company 1 that we took out of service, right? And so this basically backfills the one we took out of service that had maintenance challenges.
What happened to that one? Where's that?
That one found a new home down in Alabama, but it was used when it came and it got to the
Used
point
when it
that
left.
it was quite a challenge to keep in service and just wasn't financially.
Pretty good sized paperweight.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just go down.
Just a follow-up, Chief, did you, so it sounds like I can't imagine ladder trucks go out as much as the other trucks. It sounds like one is losing a truck that might be being used more often for a truck that may sit a little bit more than others. Is that the case, or?
I think the plan with the ladder truck is it'll be capable of carrying on other fire missions as well. It's going to be designed to carry a fire pump so it can fight tall fires as well. The key advantage of this piece of equipment is it'll have an aerial bucket essentially, and can reach into those larger apartment complexes and those taller structures. The current ladder truck that's at Company 5 is what's called a straight stick. Does not have the ability for crews to work on the end of the tip. And there's a significant safety factor with that, particularly with an unstable roof of building or otherwise. And that ladder truck was I believe, in 1993. So it is close to the end of its service life.
Yeah, but it sounds like from that explanation that truck isn't just gonna sit there for those, so the folks in the district, they're not.
The intent is gonna be,
they're not gonna
be
lose
trained
it.
on that, and that it's gonna be able to perform a multitude of functions. It is important to note for our neighboring jurisdictions, the ladder truck performs with medical first response, vehicle accidents, as well as fire suppression stuff, so some of it's gonna be training up to that capacity.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Madam Chair, my understanding is that the better way to put out a fire is to spray down on it rather than spray up on it. You've got a multi-story building.
That depends on the type of situation and structure. The biggest thing with a ladder truck is it gives you a safe operating platform above whatever you're involved in. It gives you airborne, elevated light capacity. One of the most important things the crews can do is to put it up routinely. That way they get increased comfort and function with it. The most important way to put out a fire is to deprive it of whatever the heat source or oxygen. So it's being able to approach a problem a lot of different ways. And when it comes to effecting a rescue from an elevated structure, this again increases that safety. So it does have the ability to spray the water down on it, as you saw with the fire that was in Richmond a few weeks ago. And again, when you have a large fire that is a defensive operation, that is a preferred way to do
Sure,
so.
if you got a 3-story building, you want to get above it.
We hope to not let it get to that point.
Yeah, we hope to not let it. If we're above it,
That's plan A,
spreading water
right?
down on it, the building is probably at a
Fully involved.
significant loss. So the goal would be to get the fire extinguished as quickly as possible from the inside out.
One of the, as you touched, one of the biggest concerns we have is departments and everything, being able to have a way to perform a rescue. God forbid that you had that situation, you've got to have a way to quickly be able to get to each other. The bucket has that ability to be able to easily get somebody in, bring them down, and move on to the next.
We had discussions even with larger residential structures, the ability to work on a roof that's steeply pitched. With the current ladder truck, that's a more difficult operation. With the bucket self-levels, the crews have a safe place to retreat to and work from. And it also becomes an elevated connection for a fire hose, a fire tackle on it. So it gives a lot more versatility on a wider range of situations.
The estimated useful life of this $1.4 million?
20 to 25 years. It depends on mileage, things like that. Again, the ladder truck to company 5 is in 93, and while it's still functional, it's approaching the end of that when you look at and replace all the brakes chambers on it last week, things like that. So most of them are about 20 to 25.
After that, you just hang an American flag. Okay, thank you.
So,
All right.
Okay, just a brief look at the 5-year plan. We're still trying to cyclically replace some other large equipment. So in FY22, we have fire engine replacement as well as 23 and 25. Cardiac monitor and AED replacement coming up next year as well. And another tanker in 23 and another and 25. So everything is pretty much on a cyclical replacement cycle in the fire department.
I guess I come back to my original, is there expansion built into this in terms of number of vehicles or number of career firefighters, that kind of thing?
Well, I know that, you know, we've had the issue that you all know about where a lot of these things aged out at the same time. So now
Right.
we're trying to build in
Much
this,
smoother,
especially with the ambulances. I can't speak as much to the fire engine and,
the newest fire engine in the county was, I believe, in 2008. So it is and it is newer because the one that was purchased was in Iraq. So that's the newest fire engine. And again, their average service life is 10 to 15 years. Again, depends on usage, mileage, things like that.
And how many of those do we have that need replacement at this point?
Fire engine.
Yeah.
At this point, all the engines are in reasonably good condition. As far as pushing that back, that's something, the goal is, all of them were purchased about the same time period, from about 05 to 07. So, try to make it so that it's a more staggered approach. Some of them, for example, the engine at Station 4 has gone through a while, so let's stay in service for a longer period of time. The other piece of that is, in the event of something else, we need to put something in another station or otherwise, then that frees up that apparatus as well. We still have two reserve engines. That one that is a 1980s model reserve engine, and one that is a 2001. So there are other apparatus that eventually those probably would not be conducive to having even as a replace.
Sure, I got you.
25-year CIP is, as Keith kind of speak to, is well thought out as far as the replacement plan. So
Okay.
we're not going to do multiple at one time.
Good.
They're going to meet the needs. We did look at, when we moved out a couple of years, one of the heavy rescues. We looked at the current fleet and felt like we could move that out a couple of years. But obviously, saw the need for the ladder truck at the same time. So try to shift around. But looking at the 25-year CIP, it's really well thought out. And we also did the same thing from an SUV standpoint. We kind of got to the point where we were running a couple of them a little bit too far. And this one is set up to be able to not run into those same challenges.
Good. So this, bottom line is, this gives you what you need?
Yes, sir.
For example, the tankers that we're looking at are going to be a little bit more, again, more versatile. They're a little bit, some of them could be a little bit larger, have higher capacity, but can also have some of the same functionality as an engine as well. So you have a piece of equipment that can do a little more dual approaches.
That sounds good.
Good.
Madam Chair, can I just clarify? What you're looking at on the screen on the board, again, I apologize, we'll get you copies as soon as we're back up on the network. If it's in green, it was always in the board's adopted 5-year CIP before today. Year 25 would have been year 26 last year, and so it moves up,
25 would have been 25, but
Yeah.
in the 6th year, yes.
it's the 6th year moved in. If it's in light yellow, that means it was in before, but there was a cost
Inflation.
adjustment.
Right.
if it's in the darker orangish color, that is a project that's new to the CIP. That wasn't in prior year plans. So we wanted, maybe I confused you more, but I was trying to show that for the most part, the CIP, other than some cost adjustments, there are a few new projects. Fire probably has more than most, but the CIP is generally consistent with what has been adopted in prior years, with the exception of some things being moved around and some price adjustments. The dark orange you'll see in a few of these, but not as much throughout the rest of them.
That's helpful, thanks.
But the fiscal year 21 is pretty close to what we looked at when we did our combined workshop, is that?
Oh, yes, then that's.
None of the projects have changed from the
Right.
combined workshop.
Right.
That's correct.
All right, and this is just a description of those changes for the 5-year, and like Mr. Podesky said, we'll get you a copy of this.
Okay.
And Parks and Recreation, it doesn't really show anything in FY21. Part of that is that we were able to move out the East End Park. Was originally planned for 21, 22, and 23. And so it's been shifted out 2 years to 23, 24, and 25. The East End Trails is sitting right there in the middle at FY23, and that was moved from FY24 to FY23, so that was actually moved up a little. And then Elk Island, the price was reduced from 70 to 30. So nothing going on actually for the next 2 years, and then some work at the East End.
Certainly Parks and Rec will benefit from the sports complex investments that we're making. They show up under facilities and not under Parks and Rec. And Central has a gym floor replacement that'll benefit Parks and Rec. It's just not under the Parks and Rec category. Derek's here, if you have any questions on Parks and Rec.
I think we're good. Quite full now, project, keep moving.
Questions? No?
We'll get through IT. I told Randy to go get the network back up. That was more important than being down here. So if we need them, I'll get them down.
And their FY21 really is unchanged, except for the addition of the Next Generation project, which is starting in this year, and it's actually already started. And all that money is being funded by the state. So that's all a state project. But here's where we have our recurring PC refreshes, our server refreshes, our network replacement and upgrades, and we've actually put some money in this year for the voice over internet phone solution, and actually glad we didn't have it today, or our phones wouldn't even been working. But it is that project has not started yet. But this will add 10 more thousand to it, and I think there's 29,000 in this year, so it'll be a total of a $39,000 project. And just quickly looking at the rest of it, none of that has changed, except the Next Generation, which again is all state funds, and then the AM radio station upgrade. We originally had that in FY21, and we pushed that out to FY22. A bit of juggling does go on from time to time, and the departments work really well to say maybe, hey, yeah, maybe I can wait another year to do this, or gosh, I just found out I have to move this up. So that's how some of this moving ends up happening. So I don't know, maybe to answer questions for you on this, but.
I mean, Madam Chair, Barbara, you raised an interesting point that if we do go with a VoIP phone system, then
Yep.
we lose all communications.
That's right.
As opposed to having different methods of communications. Is that something we've talked about strategically?
but it's cheaper, so. And
Well,
eventually,
Is there a plan for
so,
redundancy?
We've seen
so that's
cheap supply side
a
changes.
consideration, I
Not
guess, the
necessarily, but-
IT department will have to make.
So we will be back to you before that project moves forward, obviously, so
It's worth having a discussion over it. so.
we have talked internally about some of the pros and cons of it, certainly. We talked about it a little bit more in detail when it was initially put into the CIP, but before that project moves forward, we'll definitely bring it back to the board.
Mr. Spinell.
Mr. Badesky, I think we had a conversation about bringing some folks in to stress test our system. Would it be appropriate to put funds in a CIP for potential findings of having to upgrade our system based on what they come up with?
That's a fair question and concern, and because we actually developed this CIP recommendation before we brought you the security planning recommendation, I do anticipate that we'd all love to think that it's gonna come back without any issues, but that'd be naive. And I think we may end up coming back to the board because I don't have any numbers. If I gave you a number right now, it'd be a plugged figure. And so there's the potential to come back in the year-end considerations and talk about this a little bit more. If not, we'd either, one, build it into next year's CIP, or depending on cost, look at reserve for contingency, or reprioritize some other existing projects. So I think it's a fair question, and definitely maybe something we need to address at this, not that we haven't at this time.
Thank you.
Do have a question, if you don't mind, on the next gen 911. So, so we're saying that we have previously funded 229,000, and we're gonna fund another 49,450 this year. Is that what that's saying?
That's the amount that the state is giving towards the project.
Because when I go to the budget workbook on 328, it's item 9, it's showing zeros because it's fully funded by the state. Is that right?
Right, right. So when we go down and talk about how this is balanced, you'll see state funds come in those years. too.
Gotcha.
So we spend the money first, state
Gotcha,
reimburses.
and then they give us back, right, gotcha. Okey-dokey, good answer.
Okay, Sheriff CIP, very simply, it is their vehicle replacement. There was 435 in previously, and there's 435 in this year. And before I let the sheriff speak to his replacement cycle, I will note though, as you mentioned, Mr. Peterson, as the number of cars increases in total, your replacement cycle has to increase as well. For purposes of this CIP, it was flattened out, because that's the way we could make it work. It's not maybe going to be realistic, and I think as soon as the sheriff has a chance to look at all his replacement, he could very conceivably come back next year and say 435 won't do it anymore because I just got, 4 new vehicles for my 4 new deputies. So I'll let him take it from here.
The basic what it is, as Barbara said, it's fluid every year. One thing Mike and I are doing is trying to go through the entire plan and doing an outlook for everything that we'll need, and with the predict, depending on how many numbers of people we need to have to a force that without much change, it's going to. And this last 11 is a very good point about the bill that if some people that do work on this car, they're going to make it for so that's going
A lot.
And at 435, that replaces approximately 8 sheriff's vehicles.
But that's not equipped, right? That's just the vehicle, and then you've got the equipment somewhere else?
No,
Or is that
that's,
equipped?
that's equipped.
Right, that's correct. And we think we can do at least next year. Because one thing we're planning on doing, where the spec car that we're working on is actually with that amount is added a cage.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that when you were out here.
We think we can squeak it out. do that, it's gonna be close, I'll try to squeeze it out.
Any other questions? I'm
Madam
sure
Chair, I
it's
was gonna-
confusing.
Yeah, I mean, Sheriff, these numbers are gonna be close, they're not gonna be exact, but maybe during the next, for next year's cycle, you can take a harder look at maybe projecting out your staffing and your vehicles and additional equipment like cages, and I don't know, have you talked about putting deer bumpers on the front or anything too? Cause I know a lot of them come out of service because you hit a deer and, but anyway, if you could just take a look at that for next year and then we can fine tune these numbers going forward a little bit better. And again, they're kind of fluid, but if you could take, sometimes you shift the type of vehicle, you go from a Dodge Charger to a Ford Explorer or something, if there's some type of vehicle switches, all that stuff, if you just, maybe over the next year, come back to us with a little tighter numbers, that'd be great, I appreciate it.
Got it.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Okay, moving like right along, transportation. Okay, this one, FY '21, also has not changed from last year. We had the Huckett Road realignment, which is a state and or federal project. And then the Patterson Avenue corridor study, that is the one item in the transportation budget that will be, county funds will be used for that. So that would be 50,000 of county funds for that study.
Barbara, before you leave speed, I could just, board in the 2x2s that start next Monday, it looks like we just did them. We will be talking about overall planning efforts, and projects including village studies and those kinds of things. The SPIDA is amongst that discussion. And so, while it's currently funded in '21, we'll be talking about that in the context of all of the other planning efforts that we're gonna undertake. And so, we're not suggesting to change it right now, but we may have a discussion about actually delivering that work in a different time frame. So, we will be talking to the board about that in 2x2s.
And the 5-year, what we've added to that is just to illustrate that even more, is that we've showed you that what we call it grants donations, but it was the state and federal funds, that they would be expected to cover all those projects with the exception of, in FY '21, the SPIDA study. And Mr. Kilduff is here as well as Tom Coleman if you have any questions on these projects.
It's all green, there's no yellow and no orange, so. there's no-
So nothing's
See, I'm
changed,
getting-
right.
I'm getting.
Keep moving.
Okay.
Good point.
Education. All right, we didn't try to color code education. There was too many changes and so we're just gonna, of course, talk about FY '21 and Dr. Rayleigh's here to discuss it further, but we do have what we always put in, which is one bus, and we had the another 500,000 towards the Goochland Elementary, and you can see we've already contributed $1.2 million in cash. Another 500 will be 1.7 in cash, and then some of their upkeep and maintenance type projects. Still have to continue to spend a little bit of money on the old Goochland Elementary, the high school upgrades, the middle school upgrades. The Randolph Elementary is to finish the parking project there. The Goochland Tech, spend a little bit of money there, and Bird Elementary as well. And I'll just show you the 5-year and then I'll let, and again, we didn't try to put in a lot of colors here, but we do see the Goochland Elementary coming in FY '22, and it's listed under Goochland Middle School upgrades, which can be a little confusing, but what that is all of the different Bulldog Way improvements and parking lot improvements that we discussed at the joint session with the school board. I don't think there's anything else I want to point out there. Dr. Rayleigh, do you want to point anything out in particular?
No, ma'am, that's a great summary, and of course, no change from the joint work session that we had in this room back in January.
Just, is the 100,000, is it for a new bus or just for repairs that is on this?
That is for a new bus, and any funds and the differential between a new bus and that figure typically goes to purchase a sedan or a van for people transportation. New buses are running in the high 80s at this point in time. It all depends on inflation costs and some of the other factors we discussed here today.
Which, I just bring that up because as a recent citizen, that's the only number that came in lower than anything that we expected. You'd think a big old bus would be a lot more than 100 grand. Especially when you SUVs for 55.
And that's not the only bus they replace each year.
There's $280 some odd thousand in the proposed operation budget for bus replacement. So 3 in operations and 1 in capital.
So that's, Dr. Bell, that's the difference between replacement and new?
The budget is for new school buses.
So the capital is new? I guess my question is what distinguishes put in operating versus in the CIP?
I think it's just been a historical structure that we've replicated year in and year out. But in essence, the school division's purchasing 4 new buses a year, 3 of them from the ongoing operational budget, 1 from the capital budget.
Okay, I'm not saying we shouldn't have 4 new school buses
Right,
here. Okay,
right.
so don't get me wrong there, but why would we do that?
I'm
I'm
sure
just
at some point
asking.
we might have to investigate some of that history. I think at the end of the day, you could move the funds from the operations into the capital to accomplish the same objective. I don't know if that conversation has taken place in the past.
I've really never thought about it,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
But if they're the same type of thing that we're purchasing,
Right.
then maybe. I mean,
Right.
if it's working, maybe we don't mess with it, I don't know.
Ms. Leslett, I think it's a fair question, because we actually, on the county side, did what you're suggesting, with the exception of when we hire a new person, there's a new vehicle.
Right.
Everything got moved into one fund. It's one of those things that might have historically just been that way, and we've contained it, but it's a worthy discussion that we can follow.
Right, I mean, it's not, yeah, I mean, it's not the end of the world. And also, I believe, thought it was dead, but it looks like it's come back alive for Thursday is the electric school bus project from Dominion. So that's gonna jack our school bus prices up as well. So, we'll see.
Yeah,
It's
there's
supposed
a lot
to be dead, but.
A lot of smoke and mirrors with that.
Yeah.
At the end of the
Yeah.
time, the school division does not own that vehicle.
I understand.
So we're investigating it just because we want to be good stewards of the environment, but at this point in time, we're not as excited about that as maybe some other school divisions maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm gonna, the merits of the bill, I don't think it's a bad idea, it's just that we don't end up owning them, it's like, anyway. Okay, dismantle this one.
Okay. Just on that, Madam Chair, Dr. Riley, I don't know if there's anything you are able to do from your end to take advantage of the temporary dislocation in the price of a gallon of gas or diesel, or, because crude oil's collapsed in half, and I don't know if there's a way to.
Can we store it?
I don't know if there's anything you can do at your end, because it's maybe a temporary window where they can take advantage of it, but I'm not sure how to do that.
Right. Yeah, that would, if prices remain like this, that would show up as a turn back, it would show up as an under expenditure in our budget, because ultimately, we return that back to the county on June 30th, but.
There's no way you can enter a long-term contract at a low price or anything like that.
We collaborate with the county on our gas purchases, so that would be a joint benefit
Okay.
for us all.
Something to look at, I guess.
It's certainly something you can look into. Usually the fueling companies, we pay the wholesale price on the market. So we get the advantage of it when it's down, but when it's up, they also get the, we get hit with when it goes up. So it's a percentage over what that wholesale market is. We could potentially reach out and see if we can pre-purchase. I think that some of them may be hesitant to lock that in for too long, but if we were able to do it for even a quarter, it might help. It won't hurt to make a phone call.
There you go. Just
We
look
go
at this.
countywide, everything. you know.
Exactly, and even if you do it for half or a quarter, whatever, just lock in some advantage and let the rest of it float, whatever.
Yes, sir.
That's a meaningful number in your budget.
Yes, sir.
Are all county vehicles fueled at our fueling stations? I mean, other than like maybe a one-off sort of thing, I mean, but.
I'd like to say the majority are, but there are some exceptions off due to locations and those kinds of things, especially west.
I mean, I could see it'd be some one-off situations, but I mean, that's generally our plan, that we fuel at our own fueling station.
That's
Is that
by
right?
far our preference. And one of the projects that we have with the schools over the next year is to relook at all of our fueling operations. In the CIP further out, there was an expansion of those fueling
Yeah.
options.
We talked about
We think that we can be more efficient and effective than we are today. Most of our existing stations are very old, that need upgraded. And so there's ways to potentially do that where we own, and there's ways to do that through third-party contracting. And so I think one of our goals over the next year is to evaluate
Trying to figure that out.
for sure. Right now, we do not have a Western fueling station.
Right.
And so we want to do that comprehensively rather than a one-off too.
We talked about the Western convenience center.
But if they do use the fuel card that's provided by the fuel company, they do get a state rate, state negotiated rate.
Oh, I see.
So they don't
Okay.
pay the retail rate.
That's helpful. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about balancing all of this,
All
paying
right.
for it.
Now,
We have to pay for it too.
So, the FY '21, budget is, you see the total revenues line, and then, you see the debt is a separate, item below that, total debt, and then total revenues and debt. So, in FY '21, we have a $5.7 million, budget, that is funded again mostly by cash reserves. The 840 is all those recurring things that we talked about, the sheriff's vehicles, the county vehicles, et cetera. We pay for that out of operating funds, so that's matched against money that's coming in each year. The proffers, we will be able to use $500,000 to Goochland Elementary School and $250 towards Randolph Elementary. And those are based on proffers that are already collected. And so most of those are older proffers, because once you get into the newer proffers, then you have to keep your spending to the area that they are
Right.
designated for. Then the grants and donations, $245,000, that's for the transportation project. And then the next generation, $49,450. So that's how you get funded in FY '21. And we try to keep the reserve amount about the same. We try not to have some really big years there, because that's not, we know that FY '21 money is there because we were able to set that aside last year. So that, but we don't know beyond that. And we know that this is mostly from our year-to-year operating reserves, and we also know that we can't expect that to continue if you know, there's a fairly serious recession on the horizon. So we pretty much have to look at that year to year. Some of the things like the VDOT and projects, we know we won't do those unless we have the funding. We don't project out using proffers that we haven't collected. We take a more conservative approach there. So this can change year to year. Maybe by the time we get to FY '22, I can say there's more proffers we've already collected for schools that could be used. But you see the use of the $250,000 in '22, and that is the library proffers that we talked about earlier. And then in FY '23, you see some park money being used. So the big thing that's different in '22 and '24, of course, is the debt or bond issuance. And the way I have it here and the way I have it planned is that we would do it in two issuances, because, well, and that can vary. I mean, you could just have to see how the market is when you do it. You don't want to borrow money ahead of time for the most part, because then that you're paying interest on that money and you're not earning that much interest on that money. So for the most part, you want to issue debt and have plans to use it. Sometimes you even want to have already spent some of the money, and we'll get into that more as we get closer to bond issuances, but the board has a vehicle called a reimbursement resolution, so they will let you spend some of that money ahead of time and actually reimburse yourself, so that way you can guarantee that money's not sitting around too long. So that's the way it works out here. In reality, we'll have to see what market, and you always have costs when you issue debt as well, so you don't want to be issuing debt, $5 million at a time. So that's the other trade-off you have to make, is it worth it to issue $15 million in debt because of the costs? And so those are things we'll have to discuss in the future when we get closer to that, but they're real concerns, and this is the way it lays out right now. And also we have to consider just manpower in terms of running these projects, and how many big projects can the county run at one time. So
That's a good point.
you will see.
Were you done with that?
I am done with that slide, but I'm still on that topic, but go
Okay.
ahead.
If I could, Madam Chair, if I could.
Absolutely.
So, I guess one of the arguments against bringing that 15 forward and doing the whole 54 at once is just the ability to manage the two projects simultaneously. Is that one of the reasons for shifting out part of it?
Right,
Go forward.
and balancing some other items, like if you're gonna put the cash in ahead of time, when can you afford to put that cash in? And so, the way it worked out, start putting that cash in 23, and then, so, and but what you say is a good point, in that we may get to 22 and say it only makes sense to issue it all at once, and so we'll have to see, shift other resources to make that work.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of considerations. One is, can we manage both projects at the same time? Another one is, what's our debt service as a % of budget each year?
Right.
To make sure that we manage that so that it's reasonably level or flat. I would throw out one idea. Debt issuances are expensive because you've got documentation, legal, accounting, underwriting, all of that. It may or may not, depending, be possible to do the 15 as a reopening of an existing issue as opposed to a net new issue. There might be some savings there because you can do that. Reopen under the same bond indenture so that you don't have to pay for another set of legal. The last thing is amounts of this size. We need to do a referendum. We need to take the temperature of citizens on this before we move forward. So
Correct. And
the timing in there is sufficient to
That's gotta be
allow,
factored in, right?
because it's going
Right.
to be on the ballot.
To
And
meet
so
this
we're-
timing, the referendum would have to be in the fall of 21, the November election of 21, of calendar year 21.
in order to tee us up for a 22 issuance. So, okay.
Assuming it passes.
But yeah, this isn't something that this board would decide. That number's that big, 54 million. That's something we put out there for the citizens
Right.
to weigh in on. Okay. But if we could do it as a reopening, that
But
might
you would
save
ask
some
them for
money
the whole
too.
amount at the same time.
Yes.
You would parse that out, so.
Yeah. And if you can do, and
What amount?
If you hope to.
the 54 as opposed to.
Borrow
thank you. That's
54,
one.
you would ask them
Just
for
wanted a number.
permission to
Right.
do that, 54.
The way, Madam Chairman, the
That
way
makes
this
sense.
is structured, that referendum question fundamentally is, will you authorize the county at no additional tax increase, because this is assumed to be within our current tax rate.
That's right.
To borrow up to 54 million in this case. And so that's fundamentally the referendum question that just this 5-year window asks. And that's so you can leverage the general obligation authority that your AAA bond rating has for you, and which should keep us at much lower rates than some other mechanisms that we could use without a referendum. But we worked hard to get the AAAs and.
Let's take advantage of it, yeah. Absolutely. Good.
Quick
Oh, sorry.
question. On the timing, there'll be plenty of time to talk about what y'all were talking about, the timing of these. Is the main reason, well, let me ask first, how much are we putting to the courthouse each year?
We aren't putting any more funds, well, let me clarify that. So right now, you've assigned an amount to perhaps purchase additional land, so there is that amount that we have not appropriated yet, but it is sitting in the fund balance, so I think that's 500,000 too. So if in the meantime, we see a piece of land, then that money is available. But there is no cash until, 23, when we would put $1 million in to begin the design and engineering work, and then borrow the money in FY24.
Okay, so, and we've set some aside already, not just the 500,000, there's already some set aside.
No, there was 500,000 which we already used to buy the first piece of property, and now there's.
There's a little bit of balance in that. It wasn't fully 500,000.
Right,
A lot of it.
but we were originally gonna put in 500,000, but again, to make things work,
I got you.
cash-wise, that's how it had to.
I got you. Okay, again, we'll have some time to talk about this, but if we moved, so you've got $1 million in FY23, so that's, the reason to put it in FY24 sounds like just the ability to manage the project is a big factor. Is that the case then?
Part of the reason to split it like that was our ability to manage the project, and part of the reason was to find a year where we had that $1 million, because you always want to put some cash into a project. You don't want to fund it 100%. So coming up with that $1 million was critical, and so that's how we ended up with the splitting of the timing.
Okay, that answers the question. I guess maybe while Dr. Rayleigh's here, there's a county component to managing the schools project, of course, but obviously there's going to be more county resources on a courthouse project than on a school project, right?
Because of the size and scope of these, I would say it's going to be very similar. On the schools project, we team with the schools to pull off their project. On a county, it's going to be led, schools probably won't be as involved in the courthouse. That being said, the inspections, the plan reviews, all of those kinds of things are very similar on both projects. Dr. Rayleigh, in our conversations, said we're going to hire outside professional project management on both projects regardless. The size and scope of these are well beyond our current capacities to manage these projects. And so I think the timing works out because he's hoping to enter the new school September of 24. So theoretically that project should be done, and any resources that would have potentially overlapped should be able to shift and take on the courthouse.
Okay, so you answered the one question. Your budget does include some outside management, project management.
We would assume it in the cost of the budget that's on the screen now. Yeah, but I mean, certainly it would behoove us to have an expert lead us through the process from a project management standpoint.
Thank you.
So I won't make you read all the fine print here.
Okay.
And well, the next slides we'll talk about 3A and 3B, which are two key ratios when it comes to debt. And the one being our debt capacity, and that is our net debt as a percent of taxable assessed values, and that is not to exceed 2.5%. And I should mention that our net debt in this particular instance does not include, net debt shall be defined to include bond issuance directly supported by the general fund, so it does not include the TCSG debt. This is a good practice policy, and it is a policy that most local governments have, and you can see that even with the new debt, we don't come close to the 2.5%. The other key policy is how your debt service expenditures compare to your total general fund expenditures, And in this case, we do have some things included in. We would include the transfers in that total general fund expenditures. And the target would be a target of 10% with a ceiling of 12. The dedicated stream of revenues or self-supporting debt, which is the TCSD, is not included in this calculation. So in terms of our debt service, this is what's existing right now. The only debt is the debt for the communication center, and then some old debt that is due to be paid off soon that was for the schools. And one of them gets paid off this year, and then you can see that the other one finishes up in 27.
Are those FY or calendar?
What's that?
Are those FY or calendar?
FY.
Yeah. So FY 20, so
Fiscal year.
that step down is this fiscal year.
Fiscal
This
year.
year.
Yeah.
Before June 30th.
Yes. Okay, this is a slide you've seen before as well. What we're trying to illustrate here is that we're trying to keep our debt service expenditure that we spend from year to year to year, and how much we budget, I should put it that way, at 3.9. If we were to keep it at 3.9, the red line is what we would actually budget each year, 3.9. But our actual debt service might exceed that in certain years, especially when we start issuing that new debt and some of that old debt hasn't completely fallen off yet. Now, as Mr. Peterson pointed out, we do have a big drop in our existing debt service coming up. And so that leaves us a little window between now and the time we issue debt that we can start building up a reserve. That's a fairly standard practice. People want to level off their debt service. They don't want big peaks to $4.5 million. So the plan is to slowly ease up to 3.9 million in debt budgeted each year, and build up that reserve. And we are currently building up that reserve. There's several $100,000 in right now, and we plan to add more to it, and to the point where that 3.9 would be leveled out, even though in some years you'll see a period of time there where the debt service is actually more than that.
Yeah, if I could, Madam Chair, on this one, to get ready to do a $54 million issuance, we may try and get the third AAA, so we have a triple, which would give us the best rate possible, best rate in the country. In order to do that, this is one of the things that rating agencies don't like, is when you tell them, we're gonna set money aside and resist the temptation to use it. We're a government that's not gonna spend money that we have at our fingertips, so that we'll have it when we actually need it. They get suspicious that it's gonna get spent, and then you're not gonna have it when it goes peak, and then you gotta raise the red line. So they really don't like this chart that much. They understand it, and it makes fiscal sense if you resist the temptation to do something else with that money. But they're always suspicious that governments just don't have that discipline. So they have a little bit of angst with this chart. They just as soon see all that blue below the red, so that we could pay as you go. But I'm not suggesting any change right now. I'm just, sharing with folks that this is one that they have a little bit of anxiety with.
And I think it's a fair concern. We did share this with them in New York when we went up last time, and were successful getting the second triple. And so I think as long as we can show consistency to our commitment that we're not going to do where their concerns would lie, and show that we've actually increased since we've left that cash contribution, it may go a long way. This is, it's a common practice and utilize and on how debt is paid. But certainly I think if you have it, why not put yourself in that position? But I think it's a pretty stable plan as well.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Just from the outside of the bond piece y'all was just talking about, Mr. Peterson, I would point out that little gap where we're building the reserves. Show them a picture of the school and the courthouse that we've been postponing and postponing and postponing. So talk about discipline in terms of, holding the line. We've pushed out these capital projects. So you could also make the case that, undisciplined would be like, we need this school now, let's raise taxes, let's build this school now. So I think the discipline shows on this, our discipline is also reflected in postponing these capital projects like we've done. That would be my response, but I'm on the outside, so I don't know whether that would sell or not, but.
That might take you down the rabbit hole of, so you're under-maintaining your physical assets,
No, we're
So that you definitely have to spend that blue peak. The only question is, are you gonna not touch the cash that's at your fingertips?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think Mr. Badesky said, we did share this with them. They did understand it. They just don't see very many local governments that can resist spending money if it's there.
Yeah.
But because that's what it takes in order for this to work. You've got to, and they just haven't seen that very much. But anyway, your point's taken that we do have that kind of, it's kind of incumbent on us to convince them that we're not your average local government. That's kind of where you have to go.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other ways we can, show them, prove that. But anyways, point well taken.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry, without going ahead, will one of these talk about the percent of budget that goes to, okay, I don't want to jump ahead to that yet, okay.
And this is just the same chart, but it's showing that reserve building up, and then as going back down at the same time that the debt service itself goes back down.
So,
So-
for instance, that green line builds up to 4 million. If there's a recession, then we go, well, these are tough times. We're gonna grab that 4. Well, that blue's still coming.
Yep.
That's their concern. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And there are different ways you can structure your debt, but we can talk about all that later. And I thought that there was.
Madam Chairman, if we are going to take a break, while the presentations are still on, this would probably be the best time to take 5 minutes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I didn't see the percent of budget going
I
toward
don't
that
either,
service.
but I thought that was in here. But
That's what our policy.
But we
restrictions.
are, and there is a slide like that that we are
It's out there.
within
Out
our
there.
policy of we're even below the 10%.
I thought we'd share that too if we had it. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, if you're okay, when we do update this, we can add that additional chart.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so you want to take 5?
Yeah, that'd be-
Good with me?
Take 5.
Right before the break, I asked you for an update. You said that there.
Okay, Ms.
Correct,
Horlack,
several
you want
things,
to
yeah.
start again?
Yes.
So utilities.
Now, for the most exciting projects for the day are the utility projects. Pipes in the ground, how much more exciting can you get?
And yet everybody left.
Wait, to clear the room, right?
Madam Chairman.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Can I ask, and just to clear the room even further, does the board have any further questions for Derek or fire rescue as it relates to the CIP or any other budget items? If not, I'll let them.
Just thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very, very helpful.
The only pipes I care about have hydrants.
Thank you.
All right.
All
right.
Okay, because all of the utility projects that you're going to see are expansion projects, all of these projects would be funded by connection fees.
Okay.
With the exception of the courthouse wastewater treatment plant, which would be funded with a combination of $900,000 in connection fees. So we're putting in that cash that we talked about. We should always put into every project, and $6 million in debt planned for FY22. If we see that collection fees are much higher than we anticipate, that could shift and we could do less borrowing and a little more on connection fees.
Or if I could, Madam Chair, who'd be the obligor at $6 million? Is that
those revenues that would be, it would be the revenues of the utility system.
So they're not general obligation bonds of the county, they're industrial revenue bonds?
Yeah, they
from-
generally revenue bonds, and you generally go through, the VRA pool for those kinds of funds, and then you pledge your revenues for the repayment of those. So focusing on FY '21, and you can see, we haven't colored this one. I think for the most part, the projects have stayed the same. Prices have changed, and, the utilities department has gone back and looked at these, and for the most part, prices have gone up in certain projects. So, you see what's coming, and, the Huguenot Hills Sewer Service, and the, Huguenot Hills Water Service, that design work would all be done in the same year, and that's why you see, the two amounts there. But the actual sewer service, project is planned for FY '22, and the actual water project is, not out till, 2025. And if you, have any interest in a particular project or some questions about why this might have been before, this project might be before another project, I will let Mr. Longshore answer those questions.
So the big number on the page, 6,135 and 23. Construction, is that the expansion capacity at the DOC?
It is.
Is that, yeah, so it's
It is.
actually a construction in the DOC plant, not a Guthrie
You got it.
County construction project.
You got it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And are there any other questions on utilities project? If not, we're just about ready to wrap things up.
I'm curious, that $6 million number, is that the number that we've had? That's the number we've had there for a while, so I'm trying to remember.
We've had it a few years. It came out of a preliminary engineer report done by Dewberry, one of our college engineers. I think, Todd can correct me, I think it's about 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah.
And what would that bring our capacity up to?
For the full build out, it will be, the full plant capacity will be 450,000 gallons per day. We'll get, we would still have to negotiate that with DOC, because they need some for their system as well. But it should be somewhere around 300 watts.
Today we're at 136.
We're at 136 right now.
Almost triple the capacity. We've got plenty of water. It's really, we're sewer constrained at this point.
Yeah, the agreement we had with Number 8 and Rubber Standing we signed a few years ago, once they completed their water tank, which they have now completed it, the water tank had done on River Road and Summer Road, our capacity increased from where it was to 50,000. So yeah, we'll get on the water side, it's the sewer side that.
Okay. This may be, maybe off the topic or not. The MOU we signed was a 3-way with DOC in Powhatan, and they were gonna get some water from the Cops Creek. The reservoir, I mean, that's how we were gonna get the capacity, was drawing the water out of the river that was shared from Powhatan to us.
So, yeah, ours is independent of Powhatan.
It's independent,
That's right.
and it's,
Powhatan had their own thing going on.
and it's from the Cops Creek.
Theirs was, ours is not.
Ours is not.
Just with the DOC, and then we ride the DOC's permit.
For our water,
For
so our
our
water,
water.
they're storing the river, we're riding their permit,
We
we're
are
not.
completely independent of Cox Creek.
Okay, good, because I've heard they've walked away from that. So.
They did.
Good, all right, thank you.
I don't want to, I'm at the risk of confusing this even more. This project was included in the CIP back in November when we started this process. We've been in discussions with DOC. There may be ways to phase this expansion in, that'll still get us there, that we can do more incrementally and maybe not need to borrow as much as soon. This plan here is still practical. Remember, we're sort of at the DOC's, mercy's not the right term, but they dictate when things will be constructed and not. We are definitely expressing our interest on the need for expanded capacity. There's ways to potentially do that that's not all at once that may save us from borrowing as much. but yet still allow us growth in the courthouse area. And so we may come back to you, and this is more of a primer. Right now our plan is this, and DOC has to sign off on this at the end of the day. We may come back to you in 6 months and say DOC has a way to give us, you know, instead of tripling our capacity, we can get to 2/3 our capacity in 3 years, and then we can get in, you know, 5 more years we can get the other third, and phase this a little bit different. And so this is our plan today. We're working with DOC, but there may be more than one way to skin the cat to get the capacity in the courthouse area. And so if this changes in near term, I don't want you to say, well, you told we just adopted this. We are working with DOC to figure out what's the best way to move forward to get this ultimate expansion.
So that was kind of where I was going, because when I looked at the utility master plan, it's been a little while, there was like almost what I almost thought was like a stopgap, but a very expensive stopgap number that with a chunk of money, there's some capacity, but we looked at 700,000, something sticks in my mind, I can't, but we're not talking about something like that. We're still going towards, because there were some alternatives that looked like they were foolish to spend that much money. The cost for the increased capacity was way out of. So whatever we're doing with them, we're not going to track away from what looks like the best of the options that we had in front of us. I mean, we're still heading towards that better option in terms of price per capacity.
Yeah, we're not going to throw good money after bad. We're going to make sure that it's an investment that allows us to eventually get to that capacity we want to. I think the plan you're referring to had us making an investment that potentially might go away and then do something after that. What I understand we're looking at now is just a phased approach to get to that same end goal of that broader expansion. So the challenge we run into is we have a utility study that they say, okay, in the long run you need this, and here's what we estimate you do, and that we don't really operate it. So it's sort of, we have to take our plans to them and say, okay, now what works for you? And then the things that the capital plan alone that this doesn't really think through, which we have to also think through, is at the end of the day when you expand capacity, you also expand operations to a certain extent. And then so who picks up the operations for different levels of expanded capacity at the plants? And if you can phase it and not have to raise the operation costs until a later expansion, there is some value in that too. And so I think we got to look at it from a number of angles, and you guys have been having those conversations.
So the interceptor, that cost and the timing of that cost is going to be a factor of the timing of what we're doing here with the bigger project, right?
Are you speaking a couple lines down?
Yeah.
The interceptor. So in the courthouse system, there's a couple of capacity limitations right now. One of those is our own Valley View Force Main, which is being worked on by the Reed Marsh project, because they need that conveyance capacity. The next capacity milestone is the treatment plant capacity. So that's the next thing we have to figure out. After that, there is an interceptor that needs some additional conveyance capacity, and we're going to be figuring that out after we figure the treatment plant stuff out as well. So that's kind of the 3 steps we're taking to make sure we have capacity in the system. But like I said, it's the next immediate need will be the treatment capacity in the treatment plant.
Just one more thing real quick.
Sure.
Excuse me, since we're potentially putting $6 million into somebody else's facility, in the unlikely event they close the farm and abandon it, and our $6 million investment is in that, if we can figure out a way to get a right of first refusal on those assets, or allow us to take over those assets if they abandon the farm, I don't know legally what we can and can't do, but we're putting $6 million of our dollars into somebody else's facility.
Yep.
So I'd like to have some say into what happens to our $6 million in the unlikely event.
And I believe that there is a clause, I have to go back, I don't know the exact wording, but there is something to that regard in our current agreement. I can definitely look back at our current agreement and get that to you. We need to add anything more. We definitely need to.
Yeah.
Ms. McGee. But you're absolutely right. I believe that is addressed to an extent in our current agreement, but I'll get that to
Just making sure that we're not
Let's make
exposed
sure.
there, and,
At least $6 million protection, right?
and if they do abandon it, we can pick up their capacity too, that's so much the better, so, right, so.
That's true.
I'm good, thank you.
I'm good, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so basically, we've gone through, especially with focus on FY '21, we talked about how we're gonna pay for it, and now the next steps are just more steps in your whole budget process. Of course, you have your town halls coming up this month. There will be a public hearing of the entire budget, including the CIP on April 7th. And then budget adoption is on April 21st. In the meantime, we will make sure we get back to you with these slides, including one slide that I think was missing. And if you have any questions, I'm not really the subject matter expert, I'm more of how do the dollars work. But, you know, we will be glad to get you in touch with the responsible parties.
Can I add on to, this is fundamentally the last slide of the CIP discussion for today. This is our last opportunity before the town halls to get more citizen feedback. Obviously, at the April 7th meeting, we will also have an afternoon session to discuss amendments and other kinds of changes. We'll be talking to you next week about some other changes and outstanding items that have come up in our other budgetary discussions. We have a list of all those to go through for you. There's some things that you either need amended or were overlooked in the drafting, so we'll go through all those with you next week. This is the time, if there is anything that hasn't been raised yet, certainly have the opportunity to raise those questions now. We can do our best to answer them and be prepared in 2x2s for the upcoming meetings. Ms. Lesslet, you may have had this. I just wanted to point out, Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry I'm sharing this with you now, and Mr. Sharp, but we were contacted this morning by Farm Bureau, and they are no longer going to be hosting community meetings in response to the coronavirus. And so we are looking for a new location for your town hall. Lisa's already reached out to some venues today. As soon as we can identify a new venue, we will help promote that and get that out. I should note that there is the slight possibility, if we cannot identify another venue, that we may be looking at other dates. Lisa's doing her best, and we'll get back and try to close that loop as soon as possible. But wanted to announce today that right now the venue, at a minimum, the venue will change and possibly the date, but we'll get back on that. So I'll pause there if there's any other outstanding budget items, issues of concern that we need to discuss here today or continue to track.
Mr. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Mr. Middleton, you entertained kind of thoughts process-wise, other sessions at this time. I think, Ms. Novak, can you go back to slide 40?
Slide 40.
Yeah, just one back.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm looking at is that it may be helpful, probably not for this year, but for next year, is if after the column that has utilities right before previous funding, and I would just throw this out there for my peers to consider, if we could add something that's with the funding source and then just have I know we have them in the pages, but I think as people look at this, it would be interesting for them to understand not everything is coming out of their tax dollars, the local tax dollars. It may be coming from federal, maybe coming from, I know when I look at it, that's something that I always key in on is, okay, is this money that is from our taxes? That if we had it in these easy summaries, it may be easier for citizens to realize that.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a great suggestion.
It's all coming from our taxes, I get it, but the 53 cents, yeah.
We had
And
a.
it's usage fees and it's grants and whatever, right.
Trying to get the whole 25 years on one sheet, you know, to make it
No.
work, but
How
I
much
think
smaller
that's
do
a
you want it
great.
to be?
Yeah.
Well, this is the utilities, but if you go back to the one with the $111 million total, with the 54 and the
Right.
57 of the.
That sums it up, but
111.
But I think
All right, so
Yeah.
here, you're looking at the top line, the 840s, that's about 4 million over 5 years. That's operations. Then you jump down, all the way down to the reserves. You got 3.8 that's already set aside. And then the other ones are contingent reserves. And then that's about it for for, out of your tax dollars. The rest is VDOT, state, grants, proffers paid for by developers or debt being borrowed, so.
Yeah, Mr. Lomkus just had a great suggestion that I'll steal and say out loud to get on camera. Maybe for the ones that are in that, we just highlight the box, or like, not another color, but just maybe embolden them or something.
Local share versus state
Right.
share versus.
Just in some way to distinguish it. I really like that idea.
I think it's a wonderful idea. In fact, the earlier iteration before we added 25 used to have that. And so either color coding it or denoting it in one way. It's also possible for us to run this, because we only focus on year 1 and 5, to do it with those extra columns and then do the remaining 20 years a little different.
Oh, good.
And so I think there's a couple ways we can skin the cat, but I think your point's very well taken.
Say it two lines at the bottom, local share versus state share versus, and not try to break down each one, that'd be. Or just do the first 5 years like this slide and just say, okay, because year 25, who cares what the local share is in year 25, right?
You wanna finish your comment?
You mean the sidebar I was having with?
Yeah.
No, I yield back the rest of my time.
Now, do you wanna continue your comment? You wanna yield back to Ken?
Oh, I
We
would
can
not,
go
I
back
was
and
just
forth.
saying, you know, just to denote numbers, you know, everything with a 1, 2, 3, and then have that at the very end, just a
There's a lot
separate
of ways
sheet
to do it,
that just says of the 5.778 million, 2 million is federal, whatever. And so, you know, no 3 and have everything at the end, so you can jump back and forth.
I think you get the concept,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
come up with the best way to do that, that would be
You know,
great.
colors, outline, notes, your numbers, you can pick which one you like.
This will look tie-dye next year.
Yeah,
exactly.
Good suggestion.
Exactly.
On the,
Library.
Mr. Peterson.
on the town halls, the District 4 and 5, I know we're trying to find a location, a date. We may run into the same issue with all the locations. We could suggest, in lieu of town hall, come to the public meeting here, because the attendance may be dropping off at our town halls anyway. We may be going through all of this for very few people. But if they have an opportunity to comment and review the budget in a public forum here, in this emergency year, maybe that's
You're
a
talking maybe
consideration.
April 7th in the afternoon, is that when we're gonna do the?
Because, yeah, our town hall's the 26th, I think it is, 26th. So you say instead of the 26th, how about April 7th down here? And then folks that really wanna see it or comment or can have an opportunity to do it publicly.
But that is a regular board meeting, so
Right.
if we've got time to advertise, maybe make it more part of it a workshop so that we can allow more of the back and forth like we do it at a town hall,
But I was thinking citizen comment, I mean, that's,
before and after.
well, I guess the budget adoption's the 21st. Was the idea to present the budget and CIP at the 7th or the 21st?
The 7th is part of your public hearing.
It is.
It's there, and then
So it'd be
basically the
presented.
21st.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to follow, yeah, I think it's a good idea, maybe.
Because we may have very low attendance as it is, we may have trouble finding a location. If we just encourage folks to attend that meeting as opposed to a separate meeting. If it proves problematic, I mean,
Because I have to make sure it works for schools too.
Schools also, yes,
I
and schools
got
is
a
gonna be
lot of
important.
players that it has to work for.
It's not just the
Well-
budget, it's the schools and everybody else.
yeah, I guess I wasn't suggesting a full town hall presentation in addition. Like that'd be another hour and a half on top of it.
Right.
But just that, there's a citizen comment
Right.
period and a budget presentation, as opposed to doing the full town hall,
Right.
It's
And maybe
But
just
you
this
have
year, that's what we do.
Public
Just
hearing
this year.
comment with your budget.
Because we want to get it out in front while it's still in draft form before it's been adopted on the 21st. The idea is to get the budget out in draft
Right.
form and allow public comment in a
Right.
public forum. That's really one of the major things of the spring town hall. If there's a way to accomplish that because we go through all of this, change location, change the date, and then 5 people show up, and then what did you do? But if there are people that really wanna hear the budget and comment on it, there is an opportunity.
I'm already here.
Yeah. We can count on you to be wherever, whenever, right?
I mean, maybe that's something we should think about. We might think about doing all of them this year. That way. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know, mine's tomorrow, right? So we got a lot planned. We better get going. Not that we need to have mine. I mean, that's tomorrow.
Yeah, I would say even in consultation with our public safety officials, we haven't been to the point where we're recommending to
Good.
cancel group meetings quite yet.
Good.
This stuff is day by day. That could change in 2 days. And so I think we may need to start thinking through contingencies a little heavier, but probably have yours tomorrow. And we'll continue to evaluate as we move forward. I will not be surprised if other facilities don't start sharing the same concerns. I've heard of, I mean, some colleges are already requiring online classes versus everybody's starting to, some people think it's an overreaction. I just don't know, and I don't want to assume that for anybody.
Right,
But,
exactly. It feels like it is, but, if somebody's health is at stake, I don't
Yeah.
want people saying, it's fine.
If you send out and say, well, we're not having it at Farm Bureau because of the risk to people's health, but we still want you to come.
Right, exactly. They're gonna, what?
I'm just
Farm
thinking.
Bureau's not making their room available. Farm Bureau is making their rooms no longer available.
It's no longer available.
Not saying, not telling. Okay, I'm
Okay.
trying to play this out, and it's 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
tomorrow.
Yeah, mine's
So I
tomorrow,
mean,
so I.
in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we don't know how this is gonna unfold.
And D2, D3 is a county facility, so we can have it.
And
It's
mine's
just
a-
yours is usually well attended and we need a bigger forum for it, which is, may change.
Right.
And I need a lot of players at the table.
Before we wrap up, I have a quick question on transportation.
Oh, sure.
When you had the transportation CIP up there, and I noticed there was mostly, you don't need to put it back up there, but it was state federal funds. I went back to look at 1541, and I
Thanks,
read
Matt.
it. I've read it and reread it. It looks like, as far as I can tell, at our beginning of our fiscal year, there's going to be an additional 0.7% sales tax imposed in planning district 15. I can't quite, the money that's collected is supposed to go into a fund established by the comptroller. So it seems to me, I don't know when the money will start being allocated, but it seems to me, reading this, my first impression is we could have money earmarked for transportation, and it looks like the 50% locality skits is not subject to approval by the authority. It's unfettered. It's 3 parts. 35%, 15%, and then the 50%. The 50% county is it's unencumbered in terms of, other than it has to be transportation related. So anyway, and I just,
I think
it
it's
seems to me it's
years.
going to impact this coming, possibly it could impact this coming year.
No.
It's
No,
not,
no.
the money's not gonna come
No.
from?
No, they
Okay.
have to collect it for like 3 to 5 years before it's even available.
Well, that's.
Now, I don't know what they wrote into 1541. I don't know exactly how they wrote it, but I know in other localities when they've done this, they have to collect it and hold on to it and look at it for a while before they start.
None of that's gone into this.
I knew y'all hadn't done
But
it.
it will impact us in a good way, hopefully, in a couple of years.
Okay,
Maybe you'll
yeah,
still be on the board.
It does, I was trying to. What was that last part?
Maybe you'll still be on the board.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
Didn't raise taxes while you were on
That's
the
a real
board.
good point.
Well, I read through this and I guess you're right. I mean, if they're gonna sit there and look at it and hold on to it for a while, I think. There's a
Well,
lot of
depends on who-
uncertainty.
Yeah, depends on who's on that board and how there's a lot of uncertainty still about it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it spells out who can be on the board and do designees and all that. We'll learn maybe something that people ought to get a sense, but it looks like it's completely independent from anything
Right.
that's in
But
place
board's
now.
gotta be formed, well, the bill's gotta be signed, board's gotta be formed, they gotta meet. I mean, it's gonna take a little while, but it takes a couple years to collect the tax money. you know, 'cause, you know.
I guess it doesn't work as quickly as one would
But
think.
you could ask them, it's a great question to ask them. Do you have anything else?
Nothing.
Okay.
I'm good.
Anything else?
In a hurry to raise
Mr.
taxes.
Badesky, anything else you'd like to say?
I don't have anything else. There's a couple board members I need to see after.
Mr. Lumpkins? You're
I'm good.
Good, thank you.
Sure, good, okay. Any other comments? Any comments from the audience?
Sure, I'll
Staff?
make one. I really appreciated Mr. Peterson's comments about the $6 million. We are not, and Mr. Badesky has more experience with this from his Hanover era. Once we get into owning and operating, be responsible for wastewater treatment, that opens up a whole new world of regulations. I don't want to misquote this, it sounds like it's gang, MS4
It is an
regulations.
MS4, but we
And,
wouldn't be the MS4 locality.
And that is something, right now, because it's DOC, we escape, we dodge that bullet.
Right.
But before my observation, and this is very deliberative board, before we took on that responsibility, understand the unintended consequences.
Not unintended, it's huge.
Yeah, and so that could be $6 million well lost in some respects.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
that one observation I would share with you, because I know with the
I was
Bay
thinking
Act,
about it, we must.
the Bay Act, it triggers just a whole world of awful.
And they're
So-
increasing, you know.
Yes.
Yeah,
So anyway, that's this comment from the public.
Well, there may be a way to form a joint venture with Aqua Virginia or donate it to Richmond and as a payment on our debt or something. There must be a lot of different ways to do this, and, you know. Yeah, there you go.
Is there no other business
Yes.
properly to come before this board? This meeting is.
Madam Chair, just before you bang the gavel, I just wanted to congratulate our staff on doing what I consider again to be the gold standard for a CIP in Virginia. There are not many counties that go out 25 years. These pieces all fit in the right place at the right time, and they're all balanced and funded, at least for 5 years. A lot of work went into this, and yeah, I'd hold this CIP up against anybody's in Virginia. So thank you, staff, for doing a great job.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. Meeting adjourned till April 7th.
Power, Janice,